Today I wanted to do a video talking about, first off, Flygon Machamp. And this is the deck that I made top 4 at. I ended up 3rd at the 2009 World Championships. This was my first World's top 4. So beyond just the deck, I also kind of wanted to cover basically my thought process, how I arrived at this deck decision, and how I tested for Worlds leading into that year, because I think that would be kind of, I think everybody is people that have performed well at Worlds, I think they've all got a little bit different mindset, different mentality, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk about some of that stuff and show some of that. But at the same time, too, I also don't want to turn this video into, I guess, a humble brag or anything like that. Like, oh, look, hey, I made top 4 at the World Championships. So I'm going to tread kind of carefully, but I'm hoping this comes across as more informative than anything. So my approach to the World Championships differs by year. Some years I feel very comfortable, very confident in my deck choice leading up to the event, and other times I have absolutely no idea what to play. And I think one of the biggest, I would say one of the biggest misconceptions is that everybody going into Worlds has spent months testing their deck and hundreds of games and, this and that. And in reality, especially during the years I played, that is like the farthest thing from the truth. There was a lot of last-minute deck decisions being made, a lot of last-minute deck calls being made. Chris Fulop was famous for playing the events on like 3 hours of sleep. I don't recommend that at all, but it was a different time. So that year I had played Luxape at Nationals. I just came off a top 32 finish at Nationals that year. But I felt good playing Machamp, but at Nationals I felt like I was very ahead of the meta playing the deck. And I feel like after Nationals, especially with Puka winning the event with Luxape, I didn't feel like I didn't feel like the deck was so far ahead of the meta anymore, and I felt like the meta was starting to catch up with it. It just wasn't my type of deck, and I've always been more of a setup type of player. I played SP, I've had some success with SP, but it was just never the type of deck that I enjoyed playing as much. That being said, obviously I'm going to play what I feel is the best deck. Especially at the World Championship levels, my enjoyment of the deck means very little, especially at that level. But I didn't feel 100% confident in the meta call playing Luxape. I didn't feel 100% confident. My deck list just didn't feel perfect to me. I just didn't have like that perfect feeling that I'll get with deck lists on it. So heading into Worlds, I wasn't really sure what to play. Luxape was that was the deck I had. That was the deck I was ready for. I get there on, I think, probably Wednesday or Thursday, and I'm testing just some different decks. I'm playing some fun games. I was playing a lot of Mother Gengar just in the open play area. It was not a deck I was even remotely thinking about for Worlds. I thought the deck was too easy to play around for the top players. I thought it gave your opponent too much control of your damage output. But I just wanted to see kind of what other people were playing and what the kind of thought process was. The idea for Flygon was kind of the secret deck of Worlds that year. The Flygon Lock deck was, I think, the big secret deck of the year. And two friends of mine, Ben Sock and Drew Gretzky, approached me. They talked to me about Flygon. Ben was playing the Flygon Lock deck. He actually ended up grinding into Worlds with it that year, playing, I think, going 7-1, while Drew was on this Flygon Machamp play. I was not sold on the Flygon Lock deck. I thought it had a lot of weaknesses. I felt the SP matchup was shaky, even playing the Mewtwo level X. And Flygon Machamp just had a lot more raw strength in my book. And I felt like it was a deck that was much easier to pick up the day before Worlds than to be honest with you, a lock deck that I didn't feel comfortable with. So Drew and I sat down and we took a look at, he had a list for it, and I think between the two of us and our talking, we ended up changing about 10 to 12 cards in it. And ultimately, this is the list we arrived at. I played, I think, about 4 or 5 cards off from his. We switched some things in the energy lineup, and then he felt very strongly about playing 2 Broken Time Space, and I didn't think they were necessary in the deck. But essentially, this was the deck that we arrived at, and I ended up playing... I always wanted... I think deck lists were not as open back in the day, so I didn't really want to push Flygon, especially the night before Worlds, because you didn't want to flood the open gaming room with Flygon decks, so everyone's like, oh god, Flygon's going to be so popular, and then they start playing counters. So I didn't test the deck basically all night. I went down, I think, at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I played 3 games with the deck. I sat down, I think there was 6 people in the open gaming room. I played against one guy, and he was playing, I don't remember what it was, really nice guy, but he was playing a tier 3 deck. I ended up winning that game. He turns to his buddy, he goes, oh, this dude's really good, you got to play a couple games against him. So I sat down, played 2 games against his buddy, won both of those. His buddy was also playing a tier 3 deck. So heading into Worlds, all of the testing I did for this was 3 games against a tier 3 deck. So literally sitting down for round 1 of Worlds, I was learning the deck and learning the matchups as I went. This is 100% not the approach I would take to the World Championships, but it's basically how I played the deck. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the matchup section of the deck. But I just want to give a little bit of background, I guess, on the thought process for it. And I guess I should talk a little bit more about the thought process for it. I felt like the number 1 deck at the time was coming out of Nationals. I don't think anyone realized how popular Palkia was going to be at Worlds, but I knew SP decks were going to be very big. And this is one of the things that I thought Machamp would do very well against, was just basically any SP variant. And then on top of that, the other deck that saw just a ton of play was Gengar variants. And Flygon pairs extremely well against Gengar because, like I said, you have so much control over their damage output. And the strategy against Gengar is actually just to deck them out. And it's very, very hard for Gengar players to play around that, especially since none of their lists played Dusknoir. You could just fill your bench, retreat between Flygons with Nidoqueen, and there is just absolutely nothing they could do except get decked out or try to play the clock, which forced you to play very quickly. So I felt like Flygon Machamp had probably the best matchups against the top 2 decks in the format. The other thing is Flygon had a lot of raw power. Power Swing, it was very easy to hit for 100 plus damage, which was an absolutely outstanding number at this time in the game. So between that, the unlimited healing with Nidoqueen, just being able to play that retreat game, it was a deck that I felt had good matchups against what I considered to be probably the 2 most played types of decks in the format, and then I felt it had the raw strength to do well against some of the more random decks in the format. So ultimately, even though I didn't test the deck, I did have a lot of experience playing the format. I had a lot of, I had experience playing Machamp decks. I had experience playing different kinds of Flygon decks. So while everything was very new to me, or this deck was very new to me, I felt I had all the tools to be successful with it. And ultimately that led to me playing the deck. So let's just go ahead and jump into the deck profile here. So starting off here, we played 3 copies of the Inviting Trapinch. It was just, if you're going to play the Memory Berry style of the deck, it's very important that you have this Trapinch so you can use the Sand Tomb attack to stop the defending Pokemon from retreating. In a very general sense, though, against any deck, it's also very strong to be able to drag up opposing Claydolls and just force them to either have the Warp Point or force them to start committing multiple energies to retreat. Considering there wasn't a DCE, there wasn't a DRE, the only double energy in the format was upper energy. If you brought a Claydol up, they either had to have switch Warp Point or double attach to retreat. So the Inviting Trap on Claydol was very strong. It was also it wasn't great, but it was an option against the SP decks where you could drag something up like a Lucario or something they didn't want to active and then either force the energy retreat or the Poke Turn out of them. It's also worth noting that since the Inviting Trapinch does not have a Pokemon power, it's not weak to Gengar, which was a very popular deck at the time. And then we play one copy of the other Trapinch here, and the power is, if it's active, you can get a fighting energy out of your discard pile and attach it to that Trapinch. Very cheap, very easy energy acceleration. A more standard Flygon deck is going to go 2-2. We went 3-1, like I said, because of the memory berry. 2 copies of Vibrava. I didn't really see a point in splitting the line here. Energy Typhoon is just too strong to do some late game max damage, especially if you have that memory berry lock. You can throw that under a Flygon and then Energy Typhoon out of nowhere. Flygon, I did split the Flygon lines here. I played 2 copies of Rainbow Float Flygon, Sandwall, and Power Swing. This is going to be your main attacker in a lot of matchups. But I also played 1 copy of the Irritating Buzz Flygon. And this was more my own tech for it. The Irritating Buzz Flygon saw next to no play, which literally surprises me. I can't imagine why this did not see play. But essentially, as long as Flygon is your active Pokemon, put 1 damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon as long as it's not fighting. Now, you combine this with Sand Sonic, which does 60 damage, but if you attach fighting energy that turn, it hits for 80. This was extremely strong against Gengar, where if you could set the Sand Sonic and the Irritating Buzz up, you could actually knock out opposing Gengars without triggering the Fainting spell. 1 Flygon level X, absolutely standard. The Wind Erosion, the extreme attack was a nice option in case your opponent did have level X's in play, but the main reason to play it would be the additional 20 hit points and the Wind Erosion power, discarding the top card of your opponent's deck. Now, even if you were not looking to win the game via deck out, you still have a very, very, very strong chance of just discarding important cards. Maybe you hit a rare candy, maybe you hit an energy, maybe you hit a Poketurn. Just being able to hit those cards and start denying your opponent resources can be absolutely huge. It's also worth adding that if you evolve the Irritating Buzz Flygon into Flygon level X, you do give it free retreat. So that was a nice little option that did come up a couple times for me over the course of the weekend. Standard 2-1-2 Machamp line here. This 2-1-2 was just the most consistent. I did not want to go a heavy Machamp line because it was not nearly as useful outside of the SP matchup. But the 2-1-2 line was consistent, gave me multiple Machamps in the SP matchup, but also I'm only devoting 5 spots to it. One of the biggest mistakes I'm going to say that I made over the weekend is I absolutely 100% should have played the Machamp level X, and not doing so was a major mistake for me. The Machamp level X would have allowed me to turn the Machamp into a very hard hitter in non-SP matchups, which would have made it much stronger. 2-2 Baltoy Claydol line here. Pretty standard at the time. You had to have that 2-2 line in there just to avoid bad prizes. If one person had Claydol and the other person didn't, you were very behind in those games. 101 Nidoqueen. Nidoqueen was pretty popular at the time. It's exceptionally strong in this Flygon deck because you can retreat between Flygons to heal that damage off. So essentially, I had 3 different Flygons that I could be retreating between to heal damage off. There wasn't a ton of bench damage at the time, so outside of Fear of Dusknoir, there was really nothing your opponent could do to avoid you playing that retreating game. 1 Unknown G. As long as I could guard my Claydol, I felt fine. You will see a lot of decks at the time play 2 Unknown G just due to how popular Gengar was, but I felt confident just playing one. One felt fine. 1 copy of Chatot. This just gives you a consistency option off call energy. And then 1 copy of Uxie for setup. May seem a little surprising, especially when you see much higher counts in 2010. But you really didn't need Uxie. It was just kind of a nice little option to grab off BBs, Roseannes, just for some very quick draw power. 1 Azelf. We do need the Azelf. It's very, very important when you rely heavily on the Flygon level X, or in the SP matchup when you have to have that Machamp. It's also worth noting in the SP matchup, it was great to bait out Power Sprays, especially if you kind of bluff your opponent into thinking that was an essential time walk for you. Consistency-wise, we go 4 BBs, 4 Roseannes, 4 Rare Candy. Just allow us to get our good starts here. And then I played 3 copies of Cynthia's Feelings. This is, in my opinion, one of the best decisions that I made that weekend and really helped me see the success I did that weekend. So much of the format was based around power locking your opponent that, or denying your opponent clay doll, that being able to, after a knockout, get 8 brand new cards was absolutely huge. Especially in a format when there's no EXs, so every prize is only a single prize attacker. You had a lot of opportunities to hit some massive Cynthias. On top of that, if you're playing against a deck that you're not being power locked against, you can still Cynthias for 4, and then you can Cosmic back up to 6. So, all in all, it was an outstanding card. I played 2 copies of Memory Berry here. Now, I didn't want to commit fully to playing a Flygon lock deck with the Palkia and the Mewtwo level X and all of that, but I did like that option to have the Memory Berry. And one of the things that we tested very heavily was, like I said, Gengar was probably one of the most played decks in the format. It was one of the most played decks at Nationals. And playing Memory Berry was great against a lot of decks for, like I said, dragging up Claydol, but especially in that Gengar matchup. One of the strongest plays that you could make is you throw Flygon level X up with a Memory Berry, you dump your hand, and then you literally just sit there and Sand Tomb them until they deck out. You've got to play very quickly to win this way, but essentially it turned your Gengar matchup into an absolute free win. And they just really did not have a great answer to that. And even if they were able to, they'd hit you for 30. They'd either put 3 damage counters or Poltergeist, and if they got lucky, they'd hit you for 30. And then Nidoqueen would heal 20 of that off. So they were getting absolutely nowhere while you were just burning their deck like crazy. 2 copies of Night Maintenance. This actually played very well, especially in the SP matchup. You're probably going to want to see additional copies of Machamp. Flygon level X, making sure with only 2 Flygon, 1 Sand, 1 Irritating Buzz. It was nice to have 2 Night Maintenance. I think with careful playing, I probably could have gotten by with 1, but the 2 did play pretty well for the weekend. 1 copy of Luxury Ball, 1 copy of Premier Ball. I went very, very heavy that weekend on that Flygon level X focus. I think the 1 copy of Premier Ball is correct, but I will say it is much stronger when you're also playing that 1 copy of Machamp level X, which, once again, I absolutely should have been playing. 1 copy of Warp Point. This was a very last-minute addition to the deck. I knew there would be some Flygon lock variants being played that weekend, and in my mind, I just wanted that 1 out that I could Warp Point, and then ideally, I could Extreme Attack their Flygon EX or try to lock something they brought up active and get me out of that. I never got to really test that, and in theory, and, in all honesty, it probably wouldn't have been enough to massively change those games, but it was a nice option I had. That being said, though, too, it was very good as just a general card to either steal a free prize with Machamp off takeout, or to... It was hard for them to bring up something sacrificial, knowing that I could bring up my Flygon level X and Sand Tomb, let's say a Chatot or an Uxie, to either buy myself a turn or start milling cards. So all in all, it was it was a good call. 5 copies of Fighting Energy. I would not play less than 5. Especially in a format, you play Machamp because you're expecting to see a lot of SP decks. You need a Fighting Energy to make Machamp good. The reason SP decks are good is because they do a lot of power locking. You want to make sure that you're hitting your Fighting Energy. So I played 5 copies. I would not go lower than 5 copies. I would even say 6 would be awesome, but there just isn't room in the deck. 4 copies of Call Energy, absolutely essential for consistency and for your setup. At the same time, too, with our main attacker requiring colorless energy, basically every attacker in their deck requiring colorless energy to some level, Call Energy was just outstanding. Upper Energy was great because if you were behind, it counted as 2 colorless, so basically a DCE. But even if you were even or ahead, it still counted as 1 colorless, and you could use it to fill energy requirements. It was not the same as DCE, it was not the same as DRE, but it was a great addition to have for the deck, and I don't know if the deck would have been playable without Upper Energy, to be honest with you. Especially against SP decks, they always knew that you were threatening that upper energy, and it really had to affect how they played things and how they decided things. Only one copy of Psychic Energy. This caused you had to make some decisions. Were you going to throw it onto a Flygon to give Nidoqueen free retreat? Were you going to attach it to Nidoqueen so it could retreat, or so it could attack? Some different options there. So I'm not going to go through each of the individual matchups, but I do want to talk about a couple overall points here. The first being that like I said earlier in the video, as I was going through the tournament, I was learning these matchups as I was going. Now, since I was very familiar with the format, this was a lot easier for me. But one of the other things that I found is that my opponents were also learning the matchups as they were playing against me. Because while I had a lot of experience with Palkia, my opponents had absolutely no experience playing against... I was probably the first Flygon Machamp deck that they were sitting across the table from. Now, going along with that, I found in the Palkia matchup in particular that a lot of times my opponent would Unknown G their first Palkia. As soon as they saw I was playing a Machamp deck, they would Unknown G that first Palkia. But that meant that they had to attach at least 3 energy to it before they were doing any sort of real damage against me. And to be honest with you, I think this is a mistake. I think it's a misplay. Every single one of the Palkia decks I played against, I believe, did this. But their line of thinking is I've got to protect that first Palkia. But the truth of it is I'm not just playing a Palkia deck. I'm not just playing a Machamp deck. I'm playing a Machamp Flygon deck. So I have a lot of options to knock out that Palkia, that Unknown G Palkia that maybe a standard Machamp deck would not. I also don't play as heavily to hitting that turn 1 Machamp as, say, a straight Machamp deck does. So I think one of the things, and I've talked about before, is if you lose by 1 prize or if you lose by 6 prizes, you still lose the game. And sometimes you need to take that risk at the start of the game, knowing that if it doesn't pay off for you, you're probably going to lose that game anyways. And I think that's one of the things that the Palkia player needs to be able to do, is they need to just risk it and say, hey, if he gets an early Machamp, I just lose the game. I'm going to do everything I can to Misfrit Lock him, Power Spray him, but if he gets that early Machamp, turn 1, turn 2 Machamp, I just straight lose. And just accept that fact at the start. But you need to energy gain that first Palkia and be swinging for 50 and 10 spread turn 2. Get as much pressure on me as you possibly can. Now, on the flip side of that, as soon as I realized that was basically all the Palkia players did, and I realized it's basically round 1, I slapped that Machamp down as quickly as I possibly could. I'm playing Machamp. I never hid that fact from them. Because Palkia is going to be strongest in the first 5 to 6 turns of the game where they're power locking you. They are much weaker after that. So automatically giving myself an extra turn by just showing a Machamp is always going to be the right play for me. So that's something that I did really quickly and really early. A couple of quick takeaways is nobody really expected Palkia to be this big at Worlds. It just was, it's how the matchup went. I think it has a positive Luxate matchup, so that's where a lot of the Palkia went. It also was, I think, it was just a strong deck all around. A lot of the top players favored it. Kevin, John Kettler, Pablo, a lot of the top players were favoring Palkia. Obviously, Puka stuck with his Luxate deck. Now, breaking this down, I did catch a lot of good matchups. I made a very good meta call with Flygon Machamp. I think in total I played 12 SP decks and 2 non-SP decks over the course of the rounds here. Steven Silvestro was the lone Beedrill. This was basically it was an Archetype, but it wasn't a very popular deck heading into the event. His list was completely different than any Beedrill deck we saw at the time. And it's a really, really rough matchup. I think not playing the Machamp level X hurt me in this, but if you read his report, he caught a lot of lucky breaks, had a lot of close games, played very well to get to that point. So to hit 2 Flygons in the finals was, it was just, it was his day, and 100% he deserved it that day. So nothing bad to say there. I also want to note that Ko, and he introduced himself to me as Ko, so that's what I called him, but he basically had the kind of incarnation of Sableye. I found that really interesting that Steven Silvestro and Aaron Curry kind of credited his list to kind of the initial idea for the Sableye concept they they developed the following year for 2010. So in closing here, the deck turned out to be an absolute amazing meta call. I was very fortunate to hit 12 SP decks out of 14 rounds. That being said, though, I've always believed to do well at the World Championships, you need to do 3 things. You need to be a good player, you need to make the right deck decision and be a good deck builder, and lastly, you have to run hot. And I was very fortunate this weekend to do all 3 of those. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found this informative and got to see a little bit behind the scenes on how I made the deck decision and some of the thought process that went into that. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like this in the future, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. But I hope to see you in the next video.